Thank you so much for joining us here today. And thank you as well to the Schomburg Literary Festival for making such an amazing space for thinking and enjoying and celebrating global Black literatures. It's wonderful. I have with me here today two distinguished authors. Um, to start with, my name is Aina He, and I am a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the English department, where I teach and research on African literature and digital culture. Here with me is Lady Hubbard. She's published three. This is your third book,
yes,
and
yes.
each of and the last two books are novels, right?
Yes.
And we also have with us Siddiq Fofana,
Yes.
who this is your debut,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you're also a high school
Yeah,
teacher.
high school public teacher.
Great.
School teacher.
Thank you guys for joining us today. We are going to talk about something that is very close to all our hearts, something that evokes and lives up to the joy that we are experiencing here today, which is the joy of community. And Ladi has written this gorgeous collection of stories from tenants down. Sorry,
No, it's all good.
Siddiq has written this gorgeous collection of stories titled Stories from Tenants Downstairs. And this is Ladi's book, The Last Suspicious Lady.
Yes.
Yes, this is Lady's book. There's a Nigerian name called Ladi.
Oh, really?
So it's what's playing in my head.
That's okay.
Lady's book is titled The Last Suspicious Holdout. And these books are special in the ways that they ask us to think about how you narrate the community, how you make the community visible in stories, how you make them in such a way that a reader can encounter a community. And before you say, well, I mean, you know, every story does that. Every story implies a community. In fact, the novel as a literary form was invented to give flesh to the community. I would say these two books do it in a way that is so intentional and that captures the community in ways that a typical novel will probably not be able to. And that's part of what we're going to talk about. What is unique, what is interesting about what they are doing here in terms of representing the community. So this is how this evening, the next 1 hour is going to go. I will ask Lady and Siddiq to talk about their books and also to read a 5-minute snippet for us. I'm going to ask them a few questions that kind of takes us behind the scenes to see what it took to conceive of this amazing, lush, beautiful, fictional worlds that they represent here. And then for the last 15 minutes, we're going to open it up to the audience. So let's start with Lady.
Okay.
Tell us about the book and read us a little bit about it.
Okay. All right. So this is the Last Suspicious Holdout, and it is a group of stories. They're all set in the same community. It's in my mind a community in the Gulf Coast, Florida region, and they take place between 1992 and 2007. So each story is told from the perspective of a different character, and they're each set in a different year. And when I wrote it, I was very interested in the 20-year period that preceded Barack Obama's election for a variety of reasons. And so that's what the book is basically. And I will read a very short sample from it. This is a story, it's called Yams, and it's 1997. Just then, they were all eating yams, candied and still hot from the stove. Golden brown pieces glistening with sauce that dripped from the serving spoon as it moved between the bowl and the plates. Heavy, sweet pieces that clung to their forks sank and settled on their tongues and then dissolved in a swirl of rich textures. The girl's Uncle Todd pushed back his chair and reached for the bowl and a second helping. his broad hands pressed across the table, past his water glass and the ladle of gravy, the tea lights and the decorative pancetta, up and over the enormous ham. "Why can't you just ask?" The girl looked up and saw her Uncle Richard glaring at his brother as he held up a glass of iced tea. She had two uncles. Uncle Richard always sat on the opposite side of the table between his wife, Aunt Ruth, and his daughter, Cousin Simone. Todd always sat next to his sister, the girl's mother. Uncle Todd seized the bowl with both hands. He lifted it high above the table before he realized it was still hot. His arms shuddered in a quick spasmodic jerk as the bowl tilted and dipped between his fingers. "The ham!" the girl's mother gasped. But Uncle Todd did not drop the bowl. He jiggled it between his fingers for a moment and then yanked it towards himself like a quick intake of breath, setting it down hard on the table. "That's what the tongs are for," Aunt Ruth said. Uncle Todd dunked the spoon into the bowl and dumped a large portion of yams onto his plate. Uncle Todd was her uncle who seemed convinced that if he waited for tongs, he would only find that he was still hungry and perhaps that there was nothing left. At the head of the table, the girl's grandfather asked for more iced tea. The pitcher was passed down, every hand moving slowly and deliberately, as if offering a demonstration of how such things were properly done. "Margaret called today," her grandfather said. "You get that message?" "What did she want?" Uncle Todd said. He was her uncle who had quarreled with his wife and was currently sleeping on her grandparents' couch. "To wish you a happy holiday, I imagine. How are things coming along anyway? Everything all right?" "It is what it is," Uncle Todd said. "I mean, I'm still here, aren't I? Haven't given up yet." Uncle Todd was her uncle who talked with his mouth full and then spit when he talked, sometimes slinging great gobs of half-masticated yams right onto the table. He turned his head and noticed the girl was staring. Mistaking her expression, but seeing the lull in the conversation, something inside of him must have resolved to fill it. He put down his fork and wiped his hands on his pants. He reached for the spoon and scooped out the last large piece of yam. He swung his arm across her mother's chest and held the spoon over the girl's plate. "Here," Uncle Todd said. The girl covered her plate with her hands and shook her head. "No, thank you," she said. She told him that she'd had enough and was already full. "Eat them anyway," Uncle Todd said, and tipped his spoon. The only thing that saved her from burning the backs of her hands was a sudden instinct to flinch. "What are you doing?" the girl's mother said. Uncle Todd told the girl to eat her yams. He told her it was important to eat yams because it prevented sickle cell anemia. Years later, as a grown woman, she would be sitting in a doctor's office, thumbing through a medical journal, and come across an article that offered the far more plausible explanation that sickle cell had developed in Africa as a defensive response to the threat of malaria. But that night, she sat and listened as her uncle talked about dietary deficiencies and the need for little black girls to eat yams. So I'll stop there. So,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Well done, well done. Oh, cool. My name is Sadiq. I'm a public school teacher. I live in the Bronx. I lived in Harlem for a number of years, and I wrote a bunch of stories set in Central Harlem in a fictional building called Banneker Terrace, and each story takes place from the perspective of each resident. And I guess I'll read a little bit of it. Can I borrow that?
Yes.
It's a symbol for publishing a book. It's like once you publish it, it's no longer yours. So this is called the Rent Manual, and it's about a woman who's trying to make rent. Nice. You underlined. Yay. Okay. Days left 10. Money you got $0. Money you need $350. The slip is gonna come in the mail like it do every month, with the Lysol and the Save the Children envelope looking regular as hell. It's gonna have your name, Michelle A. Sutton, on it. and it's going to say balance, and it's going to say when the balance due, first of the month. Read the slip to yourself, scream shit, then stub your toe on the kitchen table. The man in 14C gonna hit the wall. Hit the wall back. Banneker Terrace on 129th and Fred Doug ain't pretty, but it's home. Until now, it's been the same since you moved here when you was pregnant with your son Fortune. One long gray-ass building, 25 floors, 300-something apartments. 4 elevators that got minds of their own. Laundry full of machines that don't wash clothes right. Bingo room that the old folks hog up, and a trash chute that smell like rotten milk. Little bit of everybody here. Young people with GEDs, old people with arthritis, folks with child support payments, uncles in jail, aunties on crack, cousins in the blood, sisters hoeing. That's what everybody want to concentrate on. The shit that be happening only 1% of the time. Like that boy that got molested and thrown off the roof. Niggas still talk about that like it happened 5 times a week. Don't nobody want to talk about the cookouts with beer and wings and aluminum flying off the grill, and you be smelling it and thinking, can I get a plate? The summertime when the souped up Honda Civics bumping Lil Wayne be rooming the back parking lot, leaving tire marks. The dudes who be shirtless on small bikes trying to get Najee or some other snot nose to run to the store. How you take a folding chair outside and cornrow people's hair from sun up to sundown for $25 a pop and make a killing. Don't nobody want to discuss that. You didn't come up here for no shoot-ups. You came here to make a good life on your own. You were 25 and you couldn't be living with your mother and sisters in the Abernathy houses no more. Plus, Swan, Fortune's father, is here. You gonna go over there and live by yourself, your ma ass? That's what I said, ma, didn't I? Chase after a man who don't want to do nothing with no baby, and how you gonna make for rent? I'm gonna get a job like responsible people. I heard that before. Remember them last words as you study that rent slip again. Don't try to hold the tears in because you can't. Go in the bathroom, rub the snot out your eye. Your son Fortune gonna barge in as soon as you try to close the door. How you doing, mommy? Fine, baby. You don't look fine? How you know? You a doctor? I know something that will make you happy. What? He gonna flap his wings going ear, ear like Amelia Earhart. Okay, I'm gonna just stop right there. Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, appreciate that. It comes from you, but that's,
So these are amazing stories. What is beautiful about the collection is that all the stories are loosely connected, right? So it's not like a typical short story collection where we have 8 random stories. The characters pop up here and there in other stories. And so you get a sense that it is a world. The entire book is a kind of tableau that sort of shows us this world happening through different characters. So let's start by thinking about that form specifically. So Siddiq, you show us an apartment, and then as you're telling us one character story, you're talking about the person in 14F, the person in 6F, right? And characters are showing up and going in and out of other people's story. Now, there is a part of me that thinks this could have been a novel, easily, right? And for Lady, your book as well is the same thing. The character, Raymond, right? We meet him at the very beginning, and then towards the very end, he pops up again in his own story this time, and not just his mother's story. I could very easily see a world in which Raymond, there's a novel about Raymond, and then everybody else's story sort of happens around him. But there's something about keeping the stories individual while pulling together these different connections. So can you guys maybe tell us how this form evolved? How did you settle on this way of writing this world?
I don't. Do you want
We can start with Sadiq, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, for me, it came accidentally. When I first wrote stories, they were about they took place in Boston, where I grew up, and New York. I lived in Boston until I was 18, and then I moved to New York, and I've been living in New York since. And so I think before even setting, I was definitely interested in voice and how the conversations people have, the dialogue between two people. And for me, that connected all of my stories to begin with. I didn't have the idea of making one fictional building until, I didn't even come up with it. My agent came up with it. He was like, he was like, you're writing about, a similar community of people. Like, why not try to set it in around the same place? And so I can't really take the credit of saying like, oh, I thought of this building. It was more from suggestions from the agent, from workshop, and but I think that as short story writers, no matter like how random our topics are, there seems to be like thematic links, whether it's genre, if there's like magical realism, or in my sense, it's tied by voice or just the same setting. And so I just basically kind of took that instinct and then just made it a little bit more direct.
Well, I don't know. It's just the way my mind works. It's actually kind of funny. This took a really long time for me to write. Like the first story in it, which is actually the first full-length story ever published. So it was like in 2009, I think, I've been doing this. So, and I just had an idea. I'm glad it worked out, because I think it's maybe a little strange that I really wanted to write about that period. So I have been writing stories about this one community that are all set again between, actually it was 1987 and 2007 originally, because I was so interested in that period of time. And I think that the things that interested me personally in terms of identity had to do with how the idea of community itself and how people, sort of changes that were going on in terms of the way in which Black people, if I put it in one specific community, were interacting with each other, and the ways in which they were communicating with each other. So, it's very personal in a way, but that's just how it came out. It was like a personal expression of like, the way in which you see yourself is also is how other people see you, and that's, it's not a bad thing. It's just true to a certain extent. So when I thought about sort of my, because it is fiction. Like when I thought about the things that interested me, it had to do with sort of a communal experience and like a transformation of a community. Because I think a lot of really important things were happening. And we're sort of living through in a lot of different ways the repercussions of those things, like right now. So a lot of people call it like the post-civil rights era at the time and stuff like that. But I was very interested in particular in the ways in which Black identity was represented as really fractured along class lines in particular, and sort of just what that felt like and what was going on with that, and trying to make it really personal. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know if my mind really works towards short stories, because I was like, it's a very strange thing to be like, I'm gonna write a whole bunch of stories, and they're all gonna be set in the past, like not the the fairly recent past, and they're all gonna be told from different perspectives like that. So it was glad it worked out.
No, it worked out beautifully. It worked out beautifully. So when we think about community is a spatial thing, right? It's about people, it can be, right, spatial, about people occupying, sharing a particular space. For you, your characters are kind of split between the Gulf area and New Orleans. So Florida and New Orleans, right?
Wow.
And I know that that's a community that you are connected to. Can you tell us what it was like growing up in that world, experiencing that world, and then transferring it into, the core of your fictional work?
Yeah, I feel like I kind of know what it is to be like an outsider in both of those worlds, because and it's true of one of my novels draws on a lot of experiences. My grandparents lived in Florida, so I spent all my summers there, but I wasn't. Yeah, so that's interesting. My relationship to that community. I don't know if like trying to fit in places that you don't necessarily feel it makes you more like pay attention to things in a different way, because you're actively trying to understand because you have to. And the same thing with New Orleans, which is such a complicated, distinct city, and I've lived there for a really long time now, and I don't feel like I'm a New Orleanian, because it's very complicated. So I don't know, and both of those affected me. In my mind, these stories are in Florida, but there's one story that's set specifically in New Orleans, but certainly issues and things that people talk about in New Orleans kind of started to influence what I was writing about in really specific ways. There was in particular, a politician, I can't remember, I think it was Jefferson, but there's a character in here who hides money in a freezer, and he actually did that. That's in New Orleans, he got in trouble because he had all this money hidden in a freezer in his garage.
So that is a plot detail that came from an actual thing that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was very fascinating.
Yeah.
Freezer is the last place you would hide money.
Well,
but the
there
guy
you
is like,
go.
that's precisely
That's
the
what,
point.
exactly. I think you might have said
So
that.
this question is for both of you. And I think it's about writing the Black experience. Understanding that term, the Black experience, is the most radically diverse entity you can imagine. But a work like this that wants to represent a community that happens to be Black has to be self-conscious about what kind of picture are people going to see when they come out of this text. Was that something that you were thinking about, or how does the complexities and the nuances of representing Blackness in community, how did that how did you interact with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think about that a lot. As an author of color, just writing in America, that's kind of at the forefront of your mind, because when you write something and it is commercially accepted, always in the back of your mind, you're like, success equals readers who don't look like me, And so when I was writing the stories, being particularly interested in voice and dialect, I always ask myself, how would this come across to someone who wasn't a person of color? And do I have a responsibility to paint characters in the best possible light, knowing that there could be a reader out there who is reading about people of color and their access to them might be limited. And so it's a great responsibility and a great burden, especially with the characters I chose to write about, because a lot of the characters I chose to write about sometimes don't make the best decisions. And it became incredibly hard for me to write about a character that's, for instance, commits a robbery, and then to kind of explain it or give it a nuanced perspective. So it's something that I think about constantly. The first passage that I read to you all has a description of the Banneker Terrace, where all the characters come from, and there's a list of all these negative things. There's the drug, there's the prostitution, and I remember writing that and being like, I can't leave it like this, because then I'm portraying a stereotype. And my way to reconcile it was to have the character say, well, this only happens a fraction of the time. And so constantly throughout the book, I was just kind of thinking of ways to provide balance while at the same time, like, giving a reality. And so, you know, I tried, and I sometimes kind of succeeded and sometimes failed, but I tried.
No, I appreciated that in your reading. Do you know? That it's really, because that was very complicated. Parts of it, it was making me smile because I understood, like, I felt like I don't totally understand it, but like when the kid, when her child comes in and is trying to make her laugh, and all this, the way she's talking to herself, I understood that. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like all of those things are like weight. It's very hard to write if you're worrying about how someone that doesn't understand what you're writing about. I don't want to be like explaining things. I think that's like, it's very hard to be free enough so you don't feel like you have to explain or justify why you're saying something. And that's very hard for me to do. Like it's actually a lot of work because I can hear it. I know it's there, but that's not what I want to write about, and that's not really who I want to write for. Ultimate, do you know what I mean? So I just feel like ultimately I want to respect the complexity of the characters, and I don't want them to be like two-dimensional. Do you know what I mean? Like if they, and so it's just a way. It's funny because I used to. I wasn't very good, but I was at like acting, like inhabiting a role or something like that, and how to really understand, like try to process what an experience feels like, and that requires a certain amount of like identification with the character. But I do think it's really important to just respect the complexity of the experience of people ultimately. So I'm just mentioning that because I feel like that is that for me too was an enormous amount of pressure, and it still is. And sometimes things don't feel right when I write them because I feel like I'm not really getting at the truth of something in a way that I actually understand. You know what I mean? Yeah. But that's a lot of weight too. Do you know?
It's tough, and you want to like celebrate. For me, I like always looked at my project as a celebration of how the people I grew around with talk. And I noticed that instinct in your story. There he go, like in a different way, in that you know it's told from the third person, and there is this like authority to it, but then at the same time you get a character and you're telling the story from how LaTonya is the main character, and you're telling it like how LaTonya's family would say it. You know, when she discovers this photo and she's told about and you see it, and I see that voice, and I'm like, oh yeah, is that instinct to like celebrate something that you don't really see in print, but then it's like, you know, there's a very push and pull thing where you could, you know, do it all the way right or not, and you know I like the way you walk the line in there.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard though. Yeah, I understand that. So weird things that like I'm usually actually worried about offending people in my family. I don't care about. I'm less. If I'm honest, I'm less concerned about being misunderstood by, you know what I mean, like than I am about sometimes like offending people in my family. Like they won't understand this gesture. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So
that was beautiful. Just watching them go back and forth and think through that was lovely. Thank you. I mean, I think your work, the very form of it, actually makes it hard to come out of your texts with a reductive idea of what the Black experience is. I mean, what is a stereotype? It's like you take one thing and then you make it big. But by the time you go through every story, each of them is presenting you a facet of the culture. So you literally, it's impossible to read this book and not see a very complex story of what it means to be Black. There is joy, there is tragedy, there is everything in there. I'm thinking of that very story that you referred to. Is that the story where where the girl has this
Of a grandfather.
fantastical idea.
Yeah.
So you have this girl who remembers her grandfather in ways that everybody in the community knows is not the case. And she will share this story. She's been able to weave this very complex set of narrative about her grandfather. And we know that it's not true. But even in that case, when you begin to see each member of the community tell us about him, he actually becomes more complex to us, right? And her story becomes one of the many ways that we can see him. And so, I don't know, I feel like the very form that you guys are working with, where you are literally breaking up the world, makes it such that it is almost virtually impossible to reduce these lives to anything, that is small or disparaging in that kind of way. Lady, I am very struck by the place of history in your work. And you said that you're thinking between 1997 and 2007. And I was talking to somebody today, Leslie, and she has read one of your novels, and she said that, that history is a preoccupation, in your work. I wanted you to maybe help us think about what it was like reimagining the 90s and the early 2000s as a historical moment. I'm 40, and the 90s and the 2000s doesn't feel like history. But in reading your work, it really forced me to say that it is true. It's a distinct period with its own unique, sense of time and events. So I'll kind of like you to help us think about what it meant to historicize the 90s and the early 2000s. And maybe possibly, end with helping us think about why you ended the story at Katrina and Barack Obama. What is it about these two historical moments that sort of anchors the narratives at the very end?
Right. Well, because it does occur to me that I actually did start writing this not right after, like a year after he was elected, and just sort of thinking of the kind of significance that people attached to having a black president, and this sort of blip of like the idea of post-racialism. But that had actually been preceded by it really felt like sort of the hollowing out of racial discourse in general in the country. And I think that if I, think about media images, this is a way, because there's a lot going on, which is why there's so many different perspectives in the book. But the idea that you had the civil rights movement, then you did have these increasing images of sort of successful black people. And it sort of was like, well, that means there's no more racism. So if the majority is still not doing well, then it's their fault.
Right.
It's not structural. You can't say that because you have look at these images that we're always seeing of very successful, and then also that it created this sense of a real bifurcation of black identity along class lines, to the point that if you talk about, is there a way to talk about, like, if you have a specific, like, as a means of describing a basis of solidarity as race, that was very undermined by it as well, because the experiences are so different. What do these people have in common? I find it really fascinating that changed after Obama was elected. That you started, you have like Black Lives Matter, people talking about race in a very and much more direct way. It's kind of fascinating, because supposedly, like, oh, you elected black person, there's no more race, right? And then that's actually becomes the prelude for people actually talking about it in a different way, in a much more, like, there's less obfuscation about what's going on, and the reclaiming of a voice, in a sense. So that, I just find all that fascinating, and I think I was partially fascinated by that while I was writing the book. So, like, on personal level, I feel like one of the things that, there's like a lot of grief expressed in what's not expressed. I mean, I think there's a lot of not knowing how to express grief among the different characters in the book. And it, again, I associate that with language, like not having or not feeling like you have the words to express what the hell is going on right now? Do you know what I mean? Because supposedly everything's better, but it's not.
Yeah,
So what is going on with me? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even though, in spite of Obama's re-election, and this is something that I've heard you talk about, right? The myth of the post-racial world, right? Because in 2005, Katrina had happened, right? Which was sort of this is pre-social media days, but the internet was there. The world could see what systemic racism looks like and how lethal and dangerous it could be. So you've had this drama, this global drama happen in 2005, and then Obama gets elected. So that the idea that we are post-racial is not tenable, right? Because the very things that allowed Katrina to happen, and one of your characters talk about it, that look, it was not the storm.
Right. That's
There
right.
was something else.
That's right. It's a man-made problem.
right.
You know, it's not like inherent deficiency. That there's some structural, the structure broke down. All this
Right.
water came rushing in. No, it's that's what I was writing about.
It's great. I mean, and then to have Katrina happen, Obama happen, George Floyd happen, right? It's as if there's these kinds of mythologies around race and structure that this book is clearly trying to help us unthink and move away from.
Well, yeah, no, I just think it's to try. There's a lot that needs to be honestly dealt with that hasn't been yet. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what the quiet of that period was. Like, what do you have to complain about? You got what you wanted. You should all be happy now, right? What's wrong? It's anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's still obviously where we are right now is a reflection of a lot of mess
Right.
that needs to be dealt with.
It's
And
true.
this- yeah.
And which is why texts like this, they are very key for the ways that they open the conversation and just help us figure out what kind of language do we need to say or think something meaningful around this very thorny and complicated issue. Siddiq, I wanted to go back to something you said when you were thinking about what it was like trying to build a fictional world around blackness. In the book, you use black vernacular. And it made me think about, celebrated texts like Irvin Walsh's Train Spotting, where he uses Scots, or Marlon James's A History of Seven Killings, where he uses Jamaican patois. So these kinds of texts that they have a very specific flavor and taste because they're written in vernacular, and you either love or hate them, But it gives your work a very distinct flavor. And hearing you read it, I think actually brought out the poetic rhythm of that kind of language. What was it like? Why did you choose to write in black vernacular?
I think, there's several answers to that. The very first answer would be just as a city kid, this is how my neighbors, we talked. I guess the second reason would be hip hop, because I feel like, big hip hop fan, and just the way rappers told stories and lyrics, and just the way they even talked between verses was always fascinating to me. Another reason is because, there are lots of books that came before mine that are just perfect examples of voice. And I go back to the time I read Push by Sapphire, and I was like, wow, this is like opening a book and the characters talking directly to you. Color Purple by Alice Walker. Again, she's writing these notes to God, but it's just such an intimate exchange on the paper. I think of Toni Cade Bambara, and the first time I read Raymond's Run, incidentally, as a teacher, I was trying to think of a lesson, and I opened up a textbook, and I read this story about this sassy girl who's trying to beat everyone in her class in a race, and the way she talks about it and the vernacular she used, it really spoke to me. So I think once I started like really like studying it and just celebrating it on page, it made me think to the next notion of like, wow, as people of color, we all talk differently. You know, we all talk differently. Like, it's not just black, one universal black vernacular. It's like the old guy playing chess in my story, talks differently from young Swan, and kids have their own cultural vernacular, and it was just very, it was fun and an experiment to kind of see if I could differentiate on the page. There was one literary journal. It was Granta who I was blessed to publish this story called The Young Entrepreneurs of Miss Bristol's Front Porch, and it's about girls on the porch who sell candy and they make a little business. And I remember the editor from Granta emailed me and she said, "We're gonna write a little introduction to this. How would you describe the writing? Would you describe it as black English, black vernacular?" And there was a slight cringe, and I was like, I didn't know what to do. And then finally, at the last hour, I just wrote back and I said, just call it American, just call it American. And I don't know if that was the right, because, I don't know if that was the right decision, but, I think for me, it's like a celebration of language for people of color, but then it's also interwoven into our national identity as Americans.
It's beautiful. Thank you. So we are going to turn it over to the audience. If you have a question for the authors, please raise your hand and then I'll call you.
Oh, no. As a public school teacher, it's always the wait time. It's like,
yeah.
no, I will wait for you.
You have to
and
wait.
then there's a break. So, I see.
Sure. When I teach, I use that as a tactic as well. Yeah, I see his hand. Because, students don't want to. You let them stew in the silence and the uncomfortableness. One person would raise up their hand. Yes, please. Do you mind if I need to repeat the question? So the question is that the characters that Lady and Siddiq write, are they based on people in their lives or a conglomerate of people that they know?
Yeah, they are based on people I know. They tend to be based on people I know. The voices too. Some my first novel. I always said it's about my grandfather, and the character is nothing like my grandfather, but he talks like my grandfather. Like he has the same speech patterns. as my grandfather. So they're taken often from voices that I'm used to listening to.
Yeah.
But they're not literal. I mean, it's not. I can do whatever I want with them as characters. I mean, they're not like literal people. So, but they are based and inspired by people I know. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a composite, and you know, anytime I tried to like focus on one character, I remember, lady, what you said in the beginning, where you were like, you know, I'm not so much concerned about offending readers as offending my own family. You know, like, so like I'm writing a character and I'm like, oh, I don't want to make this too much like so and so because someone's going to read. And the character Mimi in my story, she does hair, and I wrote that 10 years before I met the lady who does my locks. But still, even as like I was just like, I hope she doesn't think that like this is about her, you know, like. So it's always that push and pull of making it like familiar people, but then like making it like a composite. Yeah, the regional dialect is a real thing, you know. And back to the story about the literary magazine. So they accepted that story, but then when I came across, you know, fellow workshoppers and editors, this story that had taken place in the South, for me, it was, you know, but I always grew up in the Northeast. A lot of people were like, this girl sounds like a New York City girl who's supposed to be like in North Carolina. And then it was like, again, trying to expand my study and, you know, just kind of include more Southern. And it's, you know, like, I think, for instance, up north, we'll probably say like I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. Sometimes in the South, they might be like, you know, I finna do this, like, but it's just like thinking of the regionalisms. But at the end of the day, you know, and I'm just gonna wrap this up real quick. But at the end of the day, we talked about like the Black experience and just capturing it on the page and the diversity of it. And I think of my own experience. You know, I'm the child of immigrants. My parents are from Sierra Leone. And so in a lot of ways, being born in America and having parents who weren't born here, you just kind of have this like outsider, insider thing. Like you feel American because you were born here, but then your, you know, parents are immigrants and you embrace their culture as well. And then you also see that even though your parents' culture is very different from American culture, you see like the similarities. And at the end of the day, the way people talk are very different, but you just notice a very familial current between it all.
Yes. I was going to say, too, that it's interesting because people don't talk the same with different, I mean, people, the way their speech patterns change with different people because you convey a lot through, like, how you articulate something. If you're comfortable with people, sometimes you're uncomfortable. Sometimes you're trying to make a point to remind people who they're talking to and stuff like that. That's all complicated as well. And also, I also wanted to say, too, because you were making me think of it, that I think about rhythm a lot, right? And and that's part of the beauty of different sort of voices is the rhythm. And I think about that in terms of the structure of stories as well. So, which is really interesting to me, the way it's like incorporated into the actual, you know what I mean? The way you put words together to like formulate a paragraph within it,
Right. And with stories, rhythm is very key. Because I think that's one of the places where the universality comes in. I'm struck by the fact that you told the editor, like, it's just American English, right? So it's this very specific thing, but that also has to be the space for us to think universally.
Right.
So anybody should be able to get into the story. And whether you can read it as gorgeously as you did or not, you can feel the rhythm of the language, and that sort of is where you connect with it. Any other question? Yes, please. Um, you lost me. So the second part of the question is, how does your work connect to archiving of Black literature, right? And then the first one. Yes. Why is it important for Siddiq and Lady to venerate these communities that they represent for those inside and outside? Very beautiful question.
That's an interesting question. That's a hard question for me. I feel like I am indebted to the community, that at least what I was feeling when I was writing it, in a lot of ways that didn't make sense to me when I was younger. And so in a way, yeah, it was like an acknowledgement of that for me, writing it to all the different voices, like the girl, but also the voices of the family that think she's crazy and stuff like that, but also to think about what she was going through. Do you know? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just feel like it is a part of, it's a very deep part of who I am. And it was trying to understand it. I mean, it's, again, I think it's, if it's veneration, it's just, it is respectful, and that's why I say I think that sometimes the best way you can show respect to people is to respect the complexity of their experiences, as opposed to trying to make them perfect. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, embracing the complexity. I think it's a sign of a thoughtful, considerate writer to say that, let me embrace every side of a character and let me convey a whole person. Because no matter, it's crazy, the magic of literature. Like, no matter how horrible a person is, a good writer can make them very likable. Like, in Breaking Bad, we loved Walter White. Like, he was a drug dealer, like he was, but like, there's a humanity to everyone. And I think my reason is, I think in literature we do a great job of like embracing the insider, like embracing identity. I think we're in a moment where it's like personal identity and personal politics is a very, very tender subject that we pay a lot of respect to. We question people's authority to maybe tell a story. We question, people's. We make sure that we embrace people's gender identity, and I feel like that's just a very positive thing. But then also, I think being an outsider is to be cherished too, and that you can find some, perspective in being an outsider as well. And I think the whole insider-outsider thing works well. I think of someone like even Langston Hughes, who, when you think of Langston Hughes, you think Harlem Renaissance, but then like people like forget that, he was born in Joplin, Missouri, and the fact that someone can be an insider and grow up amongst a community of people and have a certain perspective, but then also, be an outsider and have insight into that experience. And the final thing I'll say is, again, just thinking about linguistics and language fascinates me to the point of like nerddom. You know, like I look at a thing like I was thinking like why is it and there was something you said, lady, about like how your speech could change depending on who you're talking to. And when you said that, I was like, why is it sometimes that I'm an English teacher and a writer, I'll use perfect syntax, but then like I will purposely not use syntax in another case. Like, for instance, like I might say in one context, I might say, I did that already. But then if I'm with my friends and I want to show a little attitude, like stop asking me a question, I'd be like, I been did that, you know? And like, it's like, why is it that I use both things, and what is it, like, what does it say, and just study of that. So I'll always be fascinated with that.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also tied to mood as well. So even for the same person, the kinds of ways that you feel shifts your language. Like my husband would say that I sound, when I get angry, the Nigerian accent just comes on hard. Like you can't, there's no filter. Whereas in other spaces, you know, you bring your practiced accent and language. But I think that I keep hearing from both of you is really, honestly, the radical complexity of the human. And sometimes narrative wants to simplify all of that in order for it to be story, right? But I would say that what makes your works, both your books, triumphant is that instead of responding to the chaos of difference by simplifying everything, you're like, let's lean into this chaos, this messiness, and create a style of storytelling that allows us to be anchored, to enjoy these narratives of these characters' lives, but to also kind of see it in a way that we don't lose that messiness, because it seems to me that's where humanity lies, right? It's in capturing that.
That's lovely. That's great.
Yeah. That's high praise.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I think this is it. Talking you very much for coming. Thank you to our wonderful featured authors for sharing their magnificent work with us. The festival closes at 6 o'clock, so there's still time to shop, buy more books, buy swagware and things like that. Is there going to be signing?
Yeah.
Book signing?
So.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Let's get to that.
Yeah.